We're off to the races, everybody. This is Joe, joined by Kyle Buller and Michelle Janikian. Did I do it right?
Yeah, Janikian. Very good.
Hell yeah. This is Solidarity Fridays coming out February 19th. So before we jump in, just a reminder to everybody that we have a lot of classes available. You can check out Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists starting in early March. We've also got a student edition going with Rob Sarabia and Lisa Gursky. That's at a substantially lesser price than the professional grade one. So great place to start if you're not really sure where to go. We've got a lot of other projects in the works, like a clergy project, a legal project, way too many lawyers, but it's fun to learn about religious freedoms and what we might be able to do and much more. So if you want to check out much of that stuff, go to Psychedelics Today or psychedeliciceducationcenter.com and you'll find out plenty. So let's dig in. How are you guys doing?
Michelle?
Well,
welcome, Michelle.
Excited.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here.
So you are a pretty well-established writer. You've written for High Times, Double Bind, Playboy, any other like kind of big publications?
I mean, besides Psychedelics Today,
Good point.
I've had some. Yeah, I mean, I had a piece in Rolling Stone a couple years ago.
Awesome.
Teen Vogue. Yeah, I've been around a little bit. I appreciate it.
Excellent.
And you're also author of the book, right?
I wrote a book.
Companion.
Yeah. So that's really my little claim to fame is the book, Your Psilocybin Mushroom Companion.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. And you've been on the show before, so hopefully people know about you. If not, they should.
No, thank you. Well, they do now. No.
Yeah, you do now. You're here. And you've got some great blogs. You wrote a great one on John Mack and UFO abductions and how that might relate to psychedelic stuff a little bit. And you've written at least a few others. What were some of those?
I think one of my most popular ones that folks reach out to me is I wrote that big feature on psychedelics and bipolar disorder. I get a lot of people who want to talk about that. I did one about psychedelics and addiction recovery communities, how to become a psychedelic therapist. I've been doing about a year of work with you guys. It's been fun. I really love going deep with able to really dig into issues on your blog. It's super fun.
Yeah, it's so fun. And I'm glad you're playing a part. And like we like to cover some weird stuff. And I'm just glad you're there to help us cover some weird, fun topics.
I'm all about the weird. Hell yeah.
And good. All right. So we've got a number of topics to get through today. And I think the first item was this listener email. We're not going to give you credit, listener, because we didn't ask, but we're going to read it out. And then the three of us can kind of comment on it. So I'll read it here. It says, hey guys, regarding episode 45, thank you for the discussion on COVID, both in your personal lives and in the context of ayahuasca ceremonies. I live in Costa Rica, and given the behavior of primarily the expat community here, you would never know there is a pandemic. Between those who don't believe in it or on whatever level, and feel that they are protected spiritually somehow, there's a lot of permaculture, drug, and hippie culture here. To those who push back against rules surrounding it, shame others who wear masks, which is legislated. There are constant large social gatherings, and people refuse to take basic precautions. I find this to be incredibly disrespectful to the greater community, to the country in which we are essentially guests, to the nurses and doctors who are losing their lives taking care of COVID patients and contracting it themselves. So thank you for addressing it. I imagine it will be a mixed reception amongst your audience. I also want to point you in the direction of an excellent podcast, which may offer us insight into when and how to take the transition back to doing group work. Podcast is called This Week in Virology, TWIV. It's an excellent source for COVID information. It is a long-form discussion format, twice a week, plus a clinical update released every weekend. The virologists and immunologists who host the podcast discuss and dissect papers on all things COVID-related. The most recent clinical update discusses the latest regarding when and how you can safely resume work and life. They also had many discussions on long COVID and may offer insights for your girlfriend who might wish a complete recovery and soon. Thank you for your podcast. All the best. And yeah, very insightful message there. And I think I will be checking out that podcast this week in virology. So, Michelle, given you're an expat, let's maybe start with your thoughts on this whole thing.
Yeah. So, for listeners who don't know, I also live outside the US, although I'm American. I live in Mexico, which is very similar culture to Costa Rica as far as especially like the expat community. So I also live in a town with a lot of hippie culture, ceremonial work, just kind of like living off the grid, being a digital nomad, that kind of thing, which is fine. But yeah, I'm seeing a really similar thing that this listener is seeing in Costa Rica. Like you could walk around town and just pretend the virus doesn't exist. Like if you want, like it can feel like that, but it's not true. And I think part of the problem is these communities aren't interacting with the local community. And so if they're all young people, and they only interact with each other, I can see how that, at some level, maybe these people, some of them have like little bubbles that it is safe to, interact with each other and have small group gatherings or whatever. But on the other hand, I think a lot of it is people not believing in it. There's a phrase here the hippies like to say that it's a plandemic. They don't really believe that it exists. People die all the time is what they tell me when I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm social distancing. I'm not going to make this meetup. And that just because it's your grandma dying, like, why do you care now? And, there's this kind of lack of reality in the way they're talking about it. And so I think, like what I was saying, because they're not interacting with local communities, they don't have friends and family at risk. They're not going back to home where their elderly parents or whatever would be way more at risk, and they'd be like tracking these germs into the house. Now, I'm a little different just in terms of like my friend group I don't have a lot of expat friends. I've been trying to make some. Most of my friends are Mexican, and my best friend's dad just died like the last month, and it's been really hard, and it really burst our bubble. We're not hanging out even outside and stuff. And so I think that people, we are essentially guests here. I don't care what like level your paperwork is at. We have a privilege to be able to live in foreign countries as Americans or Canadians or Europeans. It's really easy for us to move and to do that. It's not easy for Latin Americans to do that. Right. It's really hard to get a visa to go into the US, even as a tourist before the pandemic. And so I just think there is a lack of respect in that behavior. And I hope people at least keep their bubbles small and wear masks in public. There's a lot of extranjeros, like foreigners here, who are not wearing masks, even in town, on the bus. I just don't understand where they're coming from. And I just really hope that they take the local community into more consideration when they're behaving this way, because it's very egotistical in my mind. And this is beyond you. This is bigger than you. Yeah. This is bigger than all of us.
How are the locals responding? They're obviously probably wearing masks and taking it very seriously.
Half and half. I think that's part of what confuses people is they're like, well, the Mexicans don't wear them. I don't have to. And it's like, well, there's a level of there's so many levels of class in Latin America that like some people they don't have access to the education and getting masks, especially indigenous communities, trying to help a little with that and some like raising money and stuff. But a lot like my friends are mostly, in a more like middle class Mexican situation. They're not indigenous and they're taking it really seriously. It's my friend who's a mom who takes it the most seriously. I haven't seen her in months because she wants to protect her family. And so I think that's part of the confusion, though, for essentially tourists down here, that they don't understand the class system and what's actually happening in a way.
Yeah, that's wild. And, we've had critiques on Florida culture a little bit on the show, and it's really troubling to see that it's not just internationally, it's also domestic. Like I've been spending a lot of time in Phoenix. I see some pretty ugly behavior there. Largely, I would say probably half the people when I go into a big store are not wearing masks. It's a theater, right? They put it on their chin. just so that like if a cop comes or something or somebody comes, they can just quickly adjust. I saw this woman very clearly overweight, probably like 500 pounds maybe, and she's cruising around with no mask on, slurping up like a double XL Coca-Cola, and like she's on the short list, and she's not giving a shit. Like at the checkout where it's really crowded at the store, I'm like, what on earth? Like, okay, you clearly just don't believe in it. And it's a really weird thing, right? Like this is what did Terence McKenna call it? The balkanization of epistemology, right? So like, we believe in a clump of facts. We don't believe in all scientific facts. So some are allowed and some are not allowed. And that's a problem, right? Like, and it's accelerating partly because of digital manipulation and other things. Yeah, Kyle, do you have any reactions to that message?
I mean, I think the first thing that kind of comes to mind just from the email and just thinking about being guests in other countries, it's just something like I had a conversation with one of my teachers a while back, and I probably mentioned this before, just talking about like when the Europeans came over and spread disease throughout all the indigenous and native communities. And I don't think it's much different right now, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, and just kind of and I guess that's the issue with globalization, right? It's like I think have a hard time sitting still, and people want to travel. People have family all over the place, and sometimes there is that reason to travel. But I think just thinking about the responsibility there, bringing this throughout the world, right? And just, I guess being aware of that, I think is super important. And just thinking about history, especially history in America and the Americas, right? Europeans, Spaniards coming over and wiping out populations that, you're talking about the class in Mexico don't have access to healthcare, the indigenous people. And it's like, are they thinking about how that's going to spread to these more maybe vulnerable communities, right? Navajo Nation in the United States got hit pretty hard. And it's like, things that I guess like maybe our privilege isn't aware of because we don't see it every day. And maybe we don't realize how our actions have these consequences to, more, I guess, like, vulnerable populations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I guess I just kind of wanted to use the opportunity to say that, I, do have a friend who's a member of the Mazatec community in Oaxaca, which is the indigenous community that has been keeping mushroom culture safe for like thousands of years, probably. And he recently started a donation fund if people do want to support that community. I'm going to use this opportunity to plug Esperanza Mazateca. There's a website now, esperanzamazateca.com. You can donate directly to Inti Garcia Flores. He's my Mazatec source for my book, and he's using that money to go directly to the Mazatec community. A lot of indigenous communities in Mexico don't have hospitals. They don't have good health care. There's a big, the Zapatista movement here in Chiapas in the 90s, like that was a big part of their forming their communities, and they built healthcare. They have like their own ambulances. If you ever go to a Zapatista caracol, it's really interesting.
I had no idea.
Yeah, because the Mexican government is not providing that for these people. And so there's still even tourism though, like into indigenous communities right now to go to their ceremonies and stuff. And so I just really hope that people just think twice before booking a ticket to Huautla, and maybe like donate some money first. And then like maybe in 2022, plan your trip to, make your pilgrimage really to the hometown of Maria Sabina and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm really feeling that. I really want to go up there. It's not even that far from me, but like, I just know that I don't want to track germs into this really vulnerable community. And so I just hope other folks just give it a little more thought before they make plans and go to group work. And, there's other... Tell me.
How is it to sit with that? Because that's something like I battle against. Like, there's so many things I want to do, but I have to like pull back and think about like bigger picture things. And so like, what is it like to sit with that feeling of I want to go up there, but there's a part of me that's like, maybe I shouldn't do that because of this other bigger consequence that could potentially happen.
It's hard and really confusing, and I'm always conflicted because you see people on social media doing it, and it's like, is that permission for me to go do it? And that's why I'm also trying not to like, even though, a lot of like Latin American culture is like outside. A lot of our restaurants and houses down here are like half outdoors. So maybe that's like a little safer. And sometimes I'll go out to dinner at an outdoor place, but I'm still not like hashtag selfie, like look at me enjoying my life. It just feels wrong right now. I don't know. To just like kind of be sensitive to like where everyone's at. Most of my followers are in deep winter right now. It's like, I don't want to be like bragging about how I can be outside with my friends when you can't. It just, I don't know. It's complicated. It's really tough. It's been a really tough year to swallow and sit with, for sure.
And I guess on like the other side, like some of these communities and towns and countries that really, I guess, thrive off of tourism, like, do you see like this mixed response of like getting hit with the pandemic? They're not having tourists there. They're struggling on that front, maybe needing to be flexible and open and wanting people to come, to their country or their town for the money.
Mexico's a good example because it's one of the only countries that never closed its border with the US. So you could have gone, people can come to Mexico now. They could have gone all through like last April. You could fly here, you could drive here. It's, Costa Rica was different. They were closed for a while. Guatemala, you need a PCR test to get in. I don't even think you need a test to get into Mexico right now. You could just come. And there is tourism and people need it. But yeah, you do. Exactly. And, another thing is people are forging those. Don't really want to get into that, but please, if you do travel, at least just get the test. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of people lost work. A lot of things were closed. There was a ley seca here for a while, which is a dry law. There was no alcohol sales to prevent tourism and people going out.
That's amazing.
In some states and cities, not everywhere. Like my city was one of them. It was a rough few months last summer, but that's all changed. Things have been lightening up since the holiday season. And yet numbers are going up because people do need to work. So it's the workers that are all wearing their masks and taking things really seriously, that are working in these restaurants and hotels that are still open and catering to not only Americans and Canadians, there's like rich people from Mexico City and stuff, people who just want to get out, who used to like fly to France every year and now they can't leave the country, so they're like going to the coast or other things. I mean, I don't know, it's complicated. I mean, you can go and be a little safe, I think, if you're already here, but we don't have to get too deep into it. But it's definitely a balance that the locals are trying to figure out, and it's tough.
I would hope at a certain point we could have maybe some of the guests from that other podcast, the virology podcast, to come on and like speak about it, because this is like we're a vulnerable population for a number of reasons. Number one, the government doesn't condone of what we do, and like we don't necessarily believe as a whole in science somehow. And there's valid critiques of science. I get that. Like I do that all the time. But if there's data, there's data, and you've got to factor that into your calculations. Yeah. And, let's not try to kill people just because we want to drink ayahuasca. Like one of my favorite lines, it's horrible to say out loud, but if ayahuasca was going to keep us safe from diseases, theoretically through the spiritual act, not just because it has some antiviral properties, kind of, don't you think like genocide in the Americas wouldn't have happened so much if ayahuasca was going to keep us safe? Chew on that, people. Like, I'm sorry. I don't want to break your heart. I don't want you to like go away from psychedelics today, but I do want you to really take some things into careful consideration here. And like, I'm dealing with, my partner can't work, can barely do anything, all because of a long COVID situation. And it's horrible to watch, tearing her up inside. And, because of that, we're dealing on half incomes. And, if you can call psychedelics staying income. And, like it's a really weird deal. Like, I don't know how to communicate to that to people who want to just go do it anyway, other than situations like this, just being really honest and vulnerable about it. It's, if people are curious, go listen to 45. I guess we got into it more there. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we beat the COVID to death for this round. And we can get on to maybe things that are a little more optimistic. Yeah, right? It'd be kind of nice. So next up is this article. I think it was New Atlas, about ketamine and reducing suicidality substantially. And what was the figure? It was kind of like a small study, right? It was what, 34
Yeah,
people?
I think it was 32.
Yeah. So, not bad, right? But it's also like,
Yeah.
helpful, right? Like this is the suspicion I've had for a while, is that ketamine can reduce suicidality quite rapidly.
Yeah. So it says
Um,
the study involved 32 adults suffering from chronic suicidal thoughts who were administered ketamine orally over a 6-week period. The subjects were assessed using the standard scale for suicidal thoughts and depression symptoms, with 69% of them showing clinical improvement at the 6-week point. Half of them, meanwhile, still reported significant improvements 4 weeks after the final dose. Yeah, that's exciting, and I think kind of goes along with what the research is. The headline there, regular oral dose of ketamine significantly reduces suicidal thoughts. That kind of triggered something in me of like, what is this? Is that kind of condoning regular use? And it's actually came up in our last class a little bit, maybe towards the end, about, and I
that was an
just
awesome
stumbled across this
conversation.
article. Yeah, I just stumbled across this article. Maybe I could try to dig it up and we'll put it in the show notes. I didn't read through it. I was skimming through it, but it was just talking about the possible deaths related to ketamine, specifically kind of in the Bay Area because of maybe increased use. And, these are things to consider as well. Ketamine does have that higher risk of abuse potential. So, how regular do you should be using it? And that, I don't think that was very much a concern within that clinical setting. I don't know if some of these people were just more recreational users from this article versus like kind of getting it clinically. But, something to consider. And this was kind of raised by Raquel, I believe. Yeah.
Right. Like we've got to just survive this thing. It's not a
Yeah.
great situation we're in with COVID. Obviously, all of us are feeling it. Some far worse than others, right? Like certainly some people have already committed suicide. A lot of people have died just from the virus itself. Yeah. So it's not a great scene. So what kind of maybe bad habits will help us survive? Like maybe it's not clean living right now that gets us through, because we can't do the things that really fill our heart the same way we were before. Yeah. And like, do you want to pick up an addiction for a year or two and then try your best to cut it out? Is it really that bad to do that? Valid question. Sometimes yes, sometimes no is the answer. And Carl Hart, like, what if I was, doing ketamine every other month, doing, injecting heroin every other month, and a few other things, like just to get by, right? Like let's kind of maximize pleasure and community how we can. But I'm not saying everybody should inject anything, but I don't want to put shame out there. People got to do what they got to do to get by.
Mm.
Yeah. And Michelle, you're working on a community piece that'll hopefully be out next week. That's kind of like part of an answer to this. Like,
yeah. So the podcast that we were just talking about, where you started talking about, COVID, when I listened to it, yeah, it really got me thinking, got me rethinking how I'm behaving a little and making sure that I like stay on track. And also got me thinking but people are still really desperate for psychedelic community. I get messages about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a DM recently and it was like, but how do I get involved during COVID? Like it's so hard. And so and then I'm just the way my algorithm and all the mailing lists that I'm signed up for is like, I'm like, well, I'm always getting invitations to all this psychedelic virtual community stuff. There's so many different integration circles and events, and there'll be a bunch of conferences coming up, around Bicycle Day, I imagine. And I'm putting together a roundup for the blog of just ways people can start to form community now in a virtual space, because not only is that important because we're all just lonely and desperate, but if we are at home working with psychedelics, because we can't do group work, I think it's still really important to be talking about it with other like-minded folks, because when we lose community, when we don't have any community and we just are using psychedelics, it can get a little delusional. I'm not thinking can get a little, I get more ego sometimes if I'm not like bouncing this stuff off people. I'm like, well, I'm a god, so like it's fine. Like, no, Michelle, we gotta back up. Like, and so I really hope that people, you know, if you're out there, like, you know, this ketamine article reminded me of just so many different things. And we'll talk about it, I think, in the Vogue article too, I think was really interesting. But yeah, we still need to have psychedelic community, even if we're doing, you know, solo journey work, like talking about the stuff you realized or just the way you're feeling, or just like listening to other people and like integration in circles and stuff, or whatever your preferred format is. It's going to be really helpful to keep people just like not too out there and to just, you know, more grounded into reality. We can still take psychedelics, but we have to live in reality, right? And so I think it's really important. And I hope folks, check out these virtual opportunities to meet folks before they can in person.
Yeah, I actually just participated in a psychedelic sangha that Eric Davis hosts.
Cool.
And I don't know, I haven't been going to too many virtual like meetups just because of like being on Zoom all day. I'm just so computer fatigued. My eyes hurt. I'm like, I can't deal with any more screen time. But it was actually really awesome just to be able to participate in that. And they did like a 30-minute meditation, and just being able to create that time to meditate with like a group, even if it's virtual. I was like, oh my God, why am I not doing this more? You know, I do it on my own, but there's something too about the group container there that's just like really helpful for containing that. So I was glad I went, even though I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. I'm kind of sick.
It reminds me of the event I just did the other day. Like I did an hour-long meetup with just listeners just to hang out with that AirMeet platform. And it was fun as hell. 9 people at a table, so it's not too overwhelming. And it was just nice to hear what people wanted to talk about and get into it. I think that's why Clubhouse is so popular, because you can just pop on and have a voice chat whenever you want. You know, still don't have Apple devices, so we can't get on there yet, but maybe someday. But, you know, it's just kind of nice to have that set time. And this is what I was doing in eras past, like before psychedelics today existed, which can you even imagine that these days? So it was like when I was in Boston and Boulder, I was doing a lot of these kind of just psychedelic salons, I was calling them, just mimicking Lorenzo Haggerty's podcast and saying, let's just get together and talk. And based on my skills from breathwork, I was able to facilitate the group fairly well and, you know, leave a lot of room to make sure everybody felt heard and connected. It was awesome. And this is like years and years before it was a thing in the popular lexicon. You know, another reason why the term everybody's saying psychedelic integration is important makes me roll my eyes. I'm like, yeah, true. But how many times do we have to say it? Like, I guess until everybody's doing it is the answer. Yeah, so there's a lot to that one. So next up is this DMT article from Algernon. They're looking at treating people with DMT to treat strokes. And not even in the article. The most interesting thing to me was on Twitter. Andrew Gallimore wrote DMT. What is it called? Alien information theory about DMT. Yeah. And, you know, he's a computational neurobiologist at Okinawa University, Englishman. Fascinating dude. He co-wrote the paper kind of laying out DMTX with Rick Strassman that Danny McQueen kind of picked up on for the DMTX project. Andrew Gallimore's comment was, what if we had low-dose subperceptual wearables that people could wear, administering subperceptual DMT to help heal these physical issues? Fascinating concept. And not too far away. Like the tech is pretty much there. It's just a matter of making it happen.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that study is really fascinating. I did a little more reading on it in I Fucking Love Science. They did a little article on it recently. And Rick Strassman is also the author of this clinical research for stroke victims. And it's cool because once they figure out if it's safe, as far as like blood pressure and stuff goes, like they want to be able to give subperceptual doses of DMT to stroke victims, like when they're in the ambulance, like right away to protect their brains. Yeah, that's really cool to me, you know, because of its like neuroprotective, neuroregenerative qualities.
This is that DMT study?
Yeah. Yeah, I went and did a little further reading because I'm a drug nerd, and and I thought it really cool because so I wrote this piece last fall for Playboy on athletes who microdose and I came at it thinking like, oh, I kept hearing about it like, oh, it's helping people make gains in their workout. And that was cool. And then every professional athlete I got on the phone for that article was like, yeah, that's cool. But I want to talk to you about like micro and macro dosing for, traumatic brain injury and CTE and how they really believe that their psychedelic practice is helping improve their symptoms of their chronic traumatic brain injuries, like hockey players and stuff. I think you had one of them on the show.
Daniel Carcio.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to more research in this field of like the neuroprotective qualities, like beyond mental health, really, right? Like, can psychedelics like help save our brains? Like, it's really cool. I'm looking forward.
I think the answer is yes.
I know, but I also like, then a lot of people are already doing it. And I'm like, I wish we could, not that you should always wait for the research to prove what you're feeling, but like, I feel a little hesitant to recommend people like microdosing mushrooms while they're, playing professional football to help save their brain from what's constantly, happening to it every day in practice. So
we've got good data on CBD, THC for neuroprotective stuff. And I think pro sports are finally picking up on that a bit.
Yeah.
Which is really great. And I don't know if I have a citation for this. I just remember reading it yesterday, but there's a new test I believe the DoD just approved for use in combat scenarios where you can do a rapid test on somebody to show if they have like substantial concussion in like a test strip kind of deal. So a soldier could administer it to another soldier to see like, okay, you need to be pulled.
Whoa.
And maybe there's some sort of intervention like a cannabis injection or something. You could
or
like,
DMT.
Yeah. DMT on the battlefield.
They already have ketamine. Why not?
Yeah. Fentanyl and ketamine lollipops. Like I'll have one of each. And then this was years ago. We were talking about like drugs augmenting war. And like, there's this Jack Black series called The Brink about like Jack Black being a diplomat in the Middle East and almost being in the mix of this like international conflict. And like, one of the Air Force pilots was selling Provigil to everybody on the, on the aircraft carrier. And he had acid too. So he and his co-pilot ate acid when they were supposed to be going on a nuclear strike run instead of Provigil. And they're on the phone with the president and all this shit. And it's like, what? But like backing up, it's like, what kind of animal is that could be put in the position of being in this kind of like $500 million jet with a nuclear weapon on LSD? Has it happened? I don't know.
Sounds right out of a Robert Antoine Wilson book. Like what?
Right. Exactly. Eminentizing the eschaton. Yeah. Like it certainly happened in fiction, right? But it's amazing.
Stranger than fiction. I love it. It's wild and scary, a little terrifying. But
So anything else on this DMT idea from Algernon?
I don't think so, except that it won't really be a psychedelic dose. Like Rick has a quote in the I Fucking Love Science article, how it's you don't want to stroke victim tripping, basically. So it will be very like sub-perceptual microdose level, I think. But if that helps, a
consent issue or?
There was no explanation on that. We should get Rick on the show to ask, but
let's do it,
right, please, Rick Strassman. But it's interesting, but I think it's really more about like the neuroprotective effects than anything else. It's not really like, some kind of enlightenment to help you out of like whatever. This is not mental health, right? This is brain health. It's different. It's interesting for sure.
Makes me wonder about like endogenous DMT, like if that does get released like during like traumatic injury and like near death experiences, if that could potentially help there. Like endogenously from, like, I'm just thinking about myself that was like bleeding to death and lack of blood going to my brain. And like, was there some sort of, endogenous chemical being released to protect that to some degree? I don't know.
I think there's an argument there. I don't know either, but I bet Rick does. And he has there's another little thing in here that just says that like previous studies of DMT have shown that it can help keep brain cells alive when oxygen is cut off. And so that's really interesting. So maybe
that's substantial.
Yeah. So,
and I know that hypothesis is like, kind of controversial since we don't have data about it. And I remember Dr. David Nichols presented at Breaking Convention, kind of like, there's all these other neurotransmitters going on and so much like different things going on in the brain when people are dying and not just DMT related. But I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if there could be some sort of correlation there.
I think I've talked about this before on the show, but a friend of mine is a palliative care doctor and a little bit resistant on the psychedelic therapy angle. I think most doctors try to be cautious until something's approved, in their rhetoric. It makes sense to a degree, but they're saying something along the lines of, people have that big chemical release near the end of life that really helps them transition for the most part. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And the hypothesis was, could the drug session, like the psychedelic therapy, impact that? And
I've always wondered that too, with like Huxley, with like taking all that LSD before his death. Like, could that have impacted the natural psychedelic mystical process? Maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe amplified it. A non-specific amplifier of death process. Eek. It's a joke, everybody. But yeah, is there something like if they went through MDMA or psilocybin therapy 6 months before they died, is that going to impact their biochemistry at the time of death? I think the answer is no. And that was just a overabundance of caution on my friend's part. But, worth considering. It's an open question. Science is still very young, everybody. Sorry. Like, I fucking love science, just like the magazine, but it's not there yet to the point where it answers every question we have. Yeah. All right. Next up, Vogue. That was an interesting article, and I didn't really know what to do with it. Like, kind of like an at-home story of doing ketamine, in your home that was prescribed, along with kind of like a bit of a narrative around psychedelic science and medicalization, right? Any hot takes on that?
So many. No, I went deep into this piece because, I could really relate. The writer was talking about, getting prescribed this at-home ketamine to help her quit smoking because she started smoking again. The pressures of writing in the pandemic, were mounting, and it was like her only coping mechanism. And I thought it was really relatable to me anyway, as also someone who does this professionally. But at first, I was like kind of not into the article because I really, I get a little frustrated with this narrative about like psychedelics being like, a silver bullet to cure mental health. And so at first I was like, ooh, what is this? And then Fred Barrett had this quote where it was like, with psychedelic assisted therapy, there's the potential to truly alter someone's life with just 1 or 2 sessions because you're getting at suffering at the source. And I just like, I don't know if I totally agree with that. As someone who's doing a lot of inner work with psychedelics, like I think it's a really long process, whether it's ketamine or psilocybin. Like, I don't know if 1 or 2 sessions is really going to cure anybody. It can really help get people out of ruts and open your mind to new ways of being. But then I think she kind of gets at it toward the end of the piece. She kind of comes to this conclusion that the ketamine was only like a Band-Aid and it wasn't working. It didn't help her quit smoking, but that it was helping her really like start to do some inner work. And that she realized like once she started peeling the layers away, there was just way too many layers for her to deal with just ketamine. And even though she's having like a psychedelic integration therapist, like help her work through it, like it wasn't quite enough. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think it kind of speaks to how I feel about ketamine personally, that it's more of a Band-Aid than a cure. And I personally believe that deeper work, like with psilocybin mushrooms, gets a little bit closer to the source, but it's still an ongoing process when you're not on the psychedelics of like really being very self-aware and self-reflective. And that's like really hard. And a lot of people they want the silver bullet because that's what our culture has showed us, has tried to tell us it's possible with things like Prozac and stuff like. So I don't know. I thought it was really interesting. I think she needs to go deeper, but that's just me. But
well, it's Vogue, right?
Yeah, but I thought it was actually pretty well thought out. There was this one
Mm.
quote from a user. I think he's like a guy who maybe came back from Iraq. I'm having trouble finding it. Or no, he was a former Navy SEAL. And he
Mhm.
said that mushrooms helped me see my situation clearly. I was in hell, but it was a hell of my own creation. And I could make the
Mhm.
choice whether to stay there and suffer or to leave and start the work of changing. And to me, I feel like that really speaks to how, at least therapy with mushrooms, or how I experience like inner journey work for personal growth with mushrooms works, is like you realize that everything is a choice, even your own suffering. And that can be really hard to integrate because, like, if,
Mhm.
if we're like, it really shows that it's all up to us and we have like a lot of agency to make change and to make new choices, but it can be really hard to do. And like,
Scary.
it's scary. And
And super existential to know that you have that choice. It's like, what do you do with that?
especially
Mm.
when we're
A lot of
taught like with
responsibility.
I agree. But like, the commercials in the 90s for Prozac would have us all believe that everything's a chemical imbalance. And mushrooms are showing this guy that, that might not be true. This is you choosing your hurt. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think that yeah, she actually like was really touching on something really kind of profound without even realizing it. And I don't know. I felt like I really wanted to using the word choice there. It was a very similar realization that I've had on mushrooms. And I thought it was really wise of this source of hers to say. I don't know if you guys have any opinions on that.
There's no cure in psychiatry, right? Like it's kind of in a lot of ways palliative. In some ways, ketamine is. I'm optimistic about ketamine in that it gives people like a window of opportunity to really dig in and make some change, whereas they would be crippled on the couch with whatever, is going on instead of that. And, that's the thing I'm most optimistic about ketamine with. Like there is that kind of neuroprotective, neurogenerative thing, but I think that might be overplaying it. But that's the only reason I'm like stoked on ketamine, I think. And the
And I think
psilocybin stuff,
sometimes,
it
I don't know,
shows that
this,
there's like roots. Go ahead, Kyle.
oh no, I was going to say, like, I think it comes back, like, when I think about this, I come back to, like, well, what's healing? What does it mean to heal anything? And Joe and I were talking a little bit, and I don't know, I was doing like this meditation the other day, and I was just thinking about like my anxiety, depression, for me at least, are symptoms of a much deeper existential, spiritual part of my life that has always been with me for a while. And I think a lot of that has stemmed from this near death experience, and a lot of my anxiety and depression stems from an existential spiritual root. And a lot of my experiences with breath work or psychedelics in the past would get me there and provide that deep level of insight of I have a choice here. And it allowed me to change my relationship, or at least provide insight on how I could change my relationship to that. But then coming back to do the work was like the challenge of like, oh shit, I need to actually change this. And how do I do that? And so, I definitely got caught up in that loop early on of, oh, if I just keep going in there, I'll figure it all out. I'll heal something. And then I guess I got to the point where it was like, I need to slowly start to make these small changes. And that's where the healing is for me, is continuing to do the work and then change your relationship over time to these processes. And for me, it's a much more spiritual, existential type of issue that I deal with. And I don't know, the deeper I go into the psychedelic world, the weirder it gets and the more existential it gets at times. Like, what the hell is going on here? How do I come back?
Yeah, no, I think the story gets at that in a way that she realized that, like, yeah, her need to smoke during writing was so much deeper than she was really even prepared to start dealing with because she had a deadline. She had to make money. Like, I could relate
Yeah.
to that so hard. I think it was a good piece. I think it was interesting. Like, for me, I feel like ketamine, I really do feel like it's a band aid because it is such a short experience. And I don't think you can go as deep and come to as many big insights because I don't know, just in my own personal work with both mushrooms and ketamine. And I do, but what I think the value in ketamine, especially for like this, reminding me in the suicidality article and just for people struggling to just get through each day, was Yeah, I did a little work with ketamine when I was feeling really hopeless and full of like a lot of dread in my own anxiety and my own work. Like I just like really wanted to give up. And ketamine, I called it a ketamine session, just like 1 hour, the lowish dose of ketamine really helped give me distance from all that dread and hopelessness. And then when I came back, I just felt like a little remotivated and I didn't feel like so weighed down by those really dark feelings. I had more space. I have no idea if it has to do with the neurogenerative qualities, maybe, probably. But for me, it was very subjective. Like I had a little more breathing room from these really dark thoughts and it helped me move forward. But it didn't really help me get to the core of some of my issues, which I'm starting to scratch the surface on deeper mushroom work. And it's a lot. Yeah.
Right. It's very different. And it's not a tryptamine. It's a very different molecule. And yeah, we've got a much longer history, genetic history with mushrooms. And there's something to that. That's not to be ignored. Yeah. And, you know, if we want to go into the spiritual thing, like perhaps there's a guiding spirit behind mushrooms that a lot of us kind of identified with a little bit. And it's not necessarily as developed a spiritual entity in ketamine as it is in mushrooms, given that ketamine's only, 7 years old or something?
I would say that Marcia Moore would disagree with you. And in her book, she's very much about the spirit of ketamine, but she's kind of problematic to use as an example. But I think there are people who believe in, you know, the spirit of molecules as well.
Right. Like, I think there's some, like, if we want to look at it, it's like, as the longer the period of use is for that molecule, the more spiritual energy that thing might have, you know, like it's interacted with more humans over time. Like LSD in the 50s, quite virgin territory, you know. LSD
by the 70s
now, not so much.
Yeah, totally. Interesting. It's a good point.
Yeah. It's like this, what's the concept? Egregores in the Western mystery tradition is this kind of like group spirit or group soul around certain things. And it gets developed over time and it can be quite powerful for certain groups. Like Freemasons talk about it quite a bit and other groups too. So it's definitely a concept in the West. It's certainly not a Western scientific concept, but it's there. Yeah. Marcia Moore. Did we do an article on her? I think we did, right?
I didn't. I did a lot of research on her and then I couldn't figure out how I wanted to frame the article or get any like original info. There's still something to say. Someday I want to write a bio of Marcia Moore.
Nice.
But you know me, it'll just take a while. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. All right. So next up, Rolling Stone article. I did not read it, but any kind of major things come up in that one?
I thought there was a couple interesting concepts, like I didn't realize the DEA is obligated to schedule a hearing when a state decides that a Schedule I substance has medical value. Now, the article went into, they never did that with cannabis. They just kind of ignore this. But there's a case to be made for like individuals encouraging the DEA to do this and to revisit like psilocybin or other psychedelics. Schedule I standing. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know about it.
That's pretty cool. I guess before we go too deep, this is from Shelby and Madison from Double Blind. The title is, Will the Federal Government Finally Embrace the Psychedelic Revolution? All right, back on track.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. And but I kept thinking, so I just recently listened to your interview with Gary Smith. And I was like, oh, but they're missing that whole like religious freedom thing that he was talking about, how like perhaps even all of us or like anyone who's a Christian, Jewish, Muslim like heritage, we might even have the legal right to use psychedelics. Like if you made the argument that our religions have a historical use. And I think that's fascinating. And I think that was missing from the piece, in my opinion. But I've been thinking about that conversation.
I think Natalie Ginsburg had a comment about religious use under here.
Yeah, in a different
find it
context.
In the Rolling Stones article, Ginsburg did?
She did. She did say something.
She's so smart. I want to get her back on again. So it says, Ginsburg says, generally speaking, she also has high hopes for the Biden administration, especially because he ran on the platform of criminal justice reform and has already ended Justice Department contracts with privately owned prisons, which is a big deal. She says the vision ultimately is to really end the war on drugs altogether. Maps' vision? That's pretty cool. I would love that. Thank you, Maps. Because I remember for a little bit, DPA had a thing where federal rescheduling of a drug, like bringing MDMA into prescribability, doesn't necessarily mean that law enforcement would follow suit appropriately. Like it might still stay in a dangerous category relative to other drugs. Yeah, which is why I'm more in line with Carl Hart, like abolish the scheduling system. Makes no sense. It's not scientific.
So the paragraph before that, Joe, the article says, there's also been a wave of ayahuasca churches in recent years applying to the DEA for permission to use ayahuasca religiously. Natalie Ginsburg, Director of Policy and Advocacy at MAP, says she's eager to see an amendment to Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which considers how spirituality and religion plays a role in psychedelic use and traditional practices while making sure peyote is protected.
That's neat. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The phrasing traditional practice kind of like, it's good, but it troubles me a little bit because it kind of suggests MDMA, LSD, et cetera, won't necessarily have the similar protection.
And will it protect like everyone? Like, will it protect me from using mushrooms in my home? Like, it's not any kind of traditional practice. Like, I don't know.
Right. Great question. Right. Like, is solo mystical work considered traditional? Like James Orrock, RIP, would. Like he identified as a mystic who did most of his work solo. A lot of the great mystics in history, while quite influential, like didn't necessarily, like all their stuff was kind of just one-on-one. It's them in the universe, right? Not necessarily them in a group. Though that said, I've talked to some priests that have had spontaneous mystical experience while doing rituals at church, not on drugs. Mm. So like a baptism, for instance, and having like a full-on mystical experience like that. Something's there. I don't know what it is, but something's there. I think there's power in ritual, especially when groups of people kind of fed their power into it over time.
Definitely.
Right. Like my spontaneous, like my most intense breathwork experience, like I was not on drugs. I don't think I was really breathing at all, but my body knew where it was and the psyche knew what was going on. And I was having full on body tremors for like 10 minutes before I laid down. I laid down and I was full on in a visionary experience, not even accelerated breathing. Somehow through that, I was able to lead a group meditation and all this other shit. I don't know how whatsoever. And eyes closed, visionary experience right away. I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like there's something there. There's something about your body and psyche being able to just jump in. It's something interesting. I think that needs more attention, especially than we can give here. All right, now some quick shout outs. Vermont looks like there's a state senator, state house rep that's going to introduce a decrim nature bill at the state level. It looks like decrim nature is kind of behind that. So good stuff there. I don't think it was introduced for a vote yet. Did either of you catch that?
They have a meeting. I think they have a meeting coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, the article that you were looking at, I think, was a year old or so, right?
Okay.
But we got some info from somebody else that they're trying to introduce this bill.
Right, that was some private emails.
Yeah.
So we can't really put it in the show notes, but it's awesome.
Yeah, that's exciting that it's like a state level thing. I know California has been trying to work on that, but it would be cool. And I mean, makes sense for Vermont. Vermont's really tiny, so good luck. Hopefully that happens.
Yeah, I think the representative had a really cool quote.
Nice.
He said, it's Brian Cena. And he said, it goes back to me ultimately is that any kind of use of substances should be treated as a healthcare matter, not a criminal issue. Whether those substances are used for treating pain or whether they're used for seeking pleasure, that is a healthcare choice. And it's a waste of society's resources to criminalize a behavior that goes back to the very roots of our humanity. I was like, who is this guy? This is great. Like, that was cool. So,
has he been hanging out with some people we know? Like, that's pretty awesome.
And this was a year ago. So it's even like before, Drug Use for Grown-Ups came out. He's saying this. So that's cool. I'm really happy about that.
Right. There's still cool stuff happening in the Northeast. As much as it drives me bonkers, it's still pretty awesome there once in a while. And I do love Vermont.
Me too.
All right. Next up, this thing in Jamaica. It looks like UWI, University of the West Indies, maybe. opens up Caribbean's first magic mushroom lab in Jamaica. It looks like it's in partnership with Field Trip. Scrolling through the pictures, I'm like, oh, cool. Everybody's wearing masks. Looks good. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing this woman. I don't know who it is. Melissa Dawn, maybe passing a petri dish over to somebody else. The Minister of Science and Technology, Daryl Vaz. She doesn't have a mask on in that photo. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, to me, that was probably just like the photographer and the marketing team saying we needed like a real face in the photo. Because every other photo they had it. Like, what? But they looked like they had some great mushrooms, healthy looking mushroom samples in some of the photos. And it's cool. Glad to see it. It's, hopefully Field Trip proves to be a long-term ally. Time will tell. But I'm just glad they're kind of making moves and opening this up to show like, hey, other governments, like you can do this too. This is not Jamaica's sole, Jamaica doesn't dominate mushrooms. Kind of do in a way, but kind of also not.
Did you say there's another place down in the Caribbean that's trying to
perhaps
open up?
Yeah. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It looks like there's some interesting stuff happening there. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't know too much yet. I'm trying to get in touch with some government officials to learn more, but it looks like they have a limited number of licenses they're giving out to businesses to come develop plant-based psychedelic stuff there. Plant and fungi based. So that's neat. They have a huge list of plants on their kind of press release I think this is all coming out in December. For whatever reason, I just found out recently about it. Kind of troubling. Got to get my game back on.
So it's cool that they're working with real mushrooms too, not just synthetic psilocybin, even though I imagine they'll probably work with both, but that's not really happening a lot, right? It's also cool. I went and checked out that tweet. So the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology posted about this on Twitter. Can you imagine if the FDA or NIDA was posting about, psilocybin research all proudly on Twitter with 2,000 likes? Or I think it only had 12 likes actually, but I liked it. I was one of 14, but I think that's really cool. It just speaks volumes. And I don't know, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, totally. Both great points. That is one of the things I do like about Field Trip is they are looking at whole plant, whole fungi, mushrooms. And I don't believe there's any other groups doing it in a for-profit way to that degree, especially. What was it, 30 different varieties or 24 different varieties of psilocybin mushrooms at their lab. It's pretty cool. And we'll see what happens. I'm sure they're going to get some proprietary things their edition of Charlotte's Web,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want that? That's a great win as a business. Of course you want to find that Charlotte and have that big win.
Some new strains. Exactly.
I'm all for experimentation. Stuff doesn't stay in a lab forever. Spores are quite easy to smuggle. And I think $1,000 goes a long way in Jamaica, so you could easily get some of them spores out of there. Sorry, Ronan. But it's, watch Jurassic Park, right? They're smuggling embryos and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff's been around for decades. So I'm not really breaking new ground there. All right, next up. And I think the final article on The Atlantic, this one kind of blew my socks off. Do psychedelic drug laws violate human rights? And this article did a great job discussing UN law as it relates to, privacy and possibly that extending into drugs, which is really freaking cool. All right, before I rant on it, I'll let you guys kind of jump on it.
I liked it. It reminded me. So this article is actually from 2016 or something.
Right.
And so back then I was reporting a lot on cannabis legalization in Mexico, and I don't report on it so much. It still hasn't fully happened. So there's that. But one of the ways that cannabis has been the process to legalize weed totally for recreational use here in Mexico has been a really similar argument in the court system. In the Mexican Constitution and in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it says that people have the right to the free development of personality. And so that basically means maybe weed, maybe mushrooms are part of that. And you shouldn't, as the government, be controlling that. And I think it was a really similar argument that the activist from England, Walsh, made in this piece. And she sounds really cool. And I really found this piece really interesting. But in Mexico, there was a really popular quote running in the media here like 3 or 4 years ago. One of the lawyers on that case was like, the state cannot prohibit you from eating a bunch of tacos because it's bad for your health. And the argument is like, the state also shouldn't be able to prohibit you from smoking marijuana just because they say it's bad for your health or your productivity or like whatever. And I think it's really interesting. I don't think the US has the same. I'm not really sure. I'm not the best on policy, but I'm not sure if we could make the same argument in the court system in the US. However, I find it really fascinating. It's really cool.
Right. And I think a lot of it was around the human rights declarations from the UN. And I think that's what Charlotte Walsh is leaning on. So if the US signed on to that, then it should be valid here. Though we have this kind of weird conflict between federal and international law, which is always fun and exciting. So I'd like to see what Gary Michael Smith Esquire has to say about it next time I chat with him. But yeah, Charlotte Walsh, I think I just got linked up with her this morning via email through Peter Schwarstedt Hughes, who's, what did he write? Neo-nihilism, Pneumonetics, and a few, I probably butchered that name, but he's a philosopher friend of ours, working with Lenny Gibson and others on this Exeter University conference in the UK on philosophy and psychedelics. So Charlotte Walsh, I think, will be speaking there in April, I think. And they were connected already. So now I'm kind of, hopefully we can pull her into the show at some point and talk international policy. And, you know, our angle here in the States really seems to be religious. But what if we could take a human rights approach and like cut this shit right out? Because it's, you know, it's horrendous. It's been horrendous for a long time. It's, you know, an extension of the new Jim Crow. And it's not great. And there's no way to really ethically support this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she made a really great point on how like drug laws are inherently infantilizing. I've been like feeling that for so long. Like, why do we feel like we need to treat adults like babies? Like they're adults. We can make decisions for ourselves. Like, I don't know. I think, yeah, she makes some really good points. I hope you get her on the show. She seems really cool and smart for sure.
Hell yeah.
But
yeah, and talk about an issue that's like beyond left and right. Like this should be an issue that both sides take really seriously. You know, do you care about human liberty? Do you care about the betterment of culture? Do you, want to lower your taxes a little bit? Do you think you should have a ton of black people in jail for crack when nobody's in jail for cocaine for the most part? Well, that's not really true, but the disproportionate sentencing is just insane. And there's no great reason for this. And we've dug ourselves into a really big hole. The reason we're having this conversation today is because of, Nixon and Harry Anslinger and the drug war. Like we wouldn't be here today as a podcast if it wasn't for these people. So like we've also inherited the drug war the same way the establishment has. And, the establishment has a really big problem around authority. Like if you keep doing shitty things, you're going to lose your authority. I made this post online not that long ago. Okay. Like federal government, what can you do to win my trust back? And I don't know what the answer is, honestly. I don't think I will at large ever really trust the US federal government. I don't really hold out hope that I'll trust them again in my lifetime because they've shown to be just like a corrupt, gross crony capitalist system that does not care about human well-being for the most part. A couple of my friends who work for the feds, like I have one friend who's a lawyer for the EPA, I think. And he's like, hey, it's made up of people. So this is the counterpoint. so like you have allies in there that you don't know about.
Yeah.
There are people that care in the EPA, and there's probably some people in the DEA. I think I saw something about a DEA agent coming out against prohibition recently in a public way. And I was like, oh, that's fucking cool. And this idea of the deep state, like Lenny was trying to spin it in like a good way, saying like, Trump wanted to do some really aggressive anti-environmental things, and like the deep state was there to slow it down. So it barely happened. So there's kind of like inertia built into the system here and there. So things don't move too quickly, which is kind of good, kind of a little creepy too. Like I posted the thing like New Jersey had 6,000 cannabis arrests since the state voted to.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
In just the last few months then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're still arresting people, still, ticketing people. it's crazy. It's just, Murphy's just not signing the bill.
Right.
And I think they were supposed to have a meeting Monday or Tuesday, and they pushed it off again. And it's all about this cleanup bill about how are they going to treat youth that use. And so they're really trying to just build that in. And, it's just, we voted in November, and, they're just kind of dragging their feet, but that's New Jersey for you.
No regard for human value, right? Like there's no value to humans. It's the value is in the system. And the police are still incentivized to arrest and prosecute. DA is still, incentivized to prosecute. Like it's a gnarly system, and the jails are incentivized to have more prisoners.
General said something about just like using discretion for low-level marijuana, cannabis possession, and crimes, and it was like, wait, didn't we vote on this? And like, you guys are just dragging your feet on signing the bill. And it's like, it's mixed messages, because a lot of people think it's legal now when it's not, and they're going out like thinking it's legal to possess, and still getting arrested for it or charged. Hopefully that all gets like, they don't get charged for it. It goes into diversion, but still, I mean, having to go through that still sucks. Traumatizing for people.
And expensive too. I imagine it's not like free. You probably have to still, if you wanted to like fight it in court, that costs money or things like that. Yeah, that's so silly. I've been keeping up with it a little. I did hear like how, there was this problem. How are we going to deal with the youth? And they were going to like put really heavy penalties on like 18 to 21 year or to 20-year-olds. And that would just like ruin so many. It was going to be probably young Black and Latino men's lives too, right? Like that's all there. It just really was frustrating. It missed the point so much, I felt like. But yeah, New Jersey, come on, please. I know so many people whose lives were ruined just for like driving around with marijuana in their car. And it's so silly.
And meanwhile, in Colorado, we got like packaging like this, and
so fancy.
They're selling the edibles. Like, get this. The bag looks like a big bag of ecstasy.
I was like, are you sure that's an
Yeah. Yeah, like totally, like 2.5 milligrams of THC and CBD. I'm like, this is a hilarious product packaging idea, especially with that little baggie.
Like, it's ridiculous.
So funny.
I think this was like $5 too. And, I'm sure cannabis in Jersey's like still in like little sandwich bags. Like probably in Mexico too, right? Like unless the product packaging has come along.
It depends on who you go to, I suppose.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I've been seeing like up in Vancouver, they have some crazy like mushrooms and fancy packaging already. Like it's not quite legal yet, but people are already starting. Like
DC too. I've seen these mushroom chocolates come out of there.
Like I've seen
with
stuff
like
from
cute
California.
Dosing. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it in Denver, LA, San Francisco. And one friend in Florida, I think he has people mail it to him. He's been getting like kind of labeled chocolate products, like mushroom chocolates. It's like, it's interesting because that means that, people who own means of production are willing to go put their stuff on the line, freedom online, business online to do this. It's a really interesting angle.
Really,
yeah. Like you don't have to own, an $80,000 factory to produce things like this. So you can do it with a couple grand, which is really interesting.
I mean, mushrooms, you don't even need a couple grand to grow a bunch of mushrooms, but I'll stop talking.
Paul Stamets had a thing a while back saying like at like maximal scale, you can probably bring psilocybin mushroom production down to $1 a pound.
Wow.
Which is fucking crazy. Fucking crazy.
I mean, vermiculite and monotubs really don't cost that much, you guys.
Right. Like I was growing monotub when I was breaking the law still that way. It was really amazing. Like what you could get out of that. Like, you guys serious? A fifth flush? Like this is too many mushrooms. like I need to just pump the brakes at like second flush. Yeah. I had a friend that was only doing a first flush for a while with monotubs. It was pretty interesting. Because it was enough. It was plenty. He wasn't trying to make money. He was rich doing other things, I think. So he's like, all right, yeah, single flush, we're fine.
Interesting. Just give it to me for the last 4. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. All right. Well, we worked through our massive list of items. We're a bit over an hour. What else? Anything else either you want to throw in before we wrap it?
Oh, good. Just
Yeah,
glad
this
to have
was
Michelle
great.
here now. It's
Oh,
fun.
Super fun.
thanks.
Yeah. It's not just United States anymore. We got another edition from North America, Mexico. Thank you, Michelle, for being here. It's been fun, and I can't wait to do more of these.
Yeah, I'm having a blast. This is great. Thank you for
Yeah.
inviting me, for sure.
Yeah. It's a lot easier than just typing away at the keyboard, right?
Yeah, or like pretending I'm typing away at the keyboard and like cleaning every corner of my house instead. Yeah.
Outstanding. All right. Yeah. As we sign off, just a reminder, check out our education at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We've got our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists that's getting really close to selling out. I probably have less, maybe right around 12 total spots between the two classes free at this point. And we would just love to have you. It's going to be an awesome project. And 12 CEs. Is that right, Kyle? And you can learn more about those CEs on the website. And I think the total project runs about 46 to 47 hours. I'm about to add an hour masterclass from somebody, so it'll be a +1. Yeah, check out our other stuff going on. A lot of fun things. If you haven't checked out our free classes, 8 Common Mistakes or Spiritual Emergence or Psychosis, go do that. They're over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I guess that's it. All right. Thank you both. And we'll see y'all on Friday. Wait, it is Friday. On Tuesday.
Tuesday.
All right. Take care, everybody.